So it seems it is all but confirmed that Checo Perez is going to be joining Cadillac. The rumours and the whispers have been heating up online, and well, apparently there is an actual date, August the 6th, the first week of the summer break, when we head into that 3-week break in the middle of the year after the Hungaroring, is when they are going to officially announce Cadillac Sergio Perez's signing. And you know what? It's something that we've kind of, I guess, known about, or there's been rumblings about since the start of this year, since Checo, of course, got released from Red Bull and Cadillac were announced that they were going to be joining. But there's multiple reasons as to why I think actually Checo Perez is a good signing for Cadillac, and I think he will be. Now, yes, he is 35 years old. He's not in his mid-20s. However, he is an experienced driver, and he brings a lot of that to Cadillac, a team that is going to be difficult for them to hit the ground running. The first team, brand new team in F1 for a decade. The last new team in F1, of course, was Haas F1, and we saw how long it took them to kind of really get up to speed, and they're, well, arguably still getting up to speed. Now they're still in the midfield, however, their financial support is going to be very different than that of GM Motors, i.e. Cadillac, and even though they are going to be using Ferrari power units until 2029, where they will then be bringing in their own GM Motors unit. But Checo Perez, I think this is, as I said, something that there's been rumblings on, but I think this was all but pretty much confirmed, personally, when we heard that the Mexico Grand Prix was renewed for an extra 3 years, because, let's be perfectly honest, we wouldn't be going to Mexico if it wasn't for Sergio Perez, because he has a tremendous amount of support, not just in Mexico, but across the world, which is also another factor as to why I think he is going to be signed by Cadillac and why he is a good signing for them. But with that renewal of the Mexico Grand Prix, the FIA, shall we say Liberty Media, not the FIA, the Liberty Media probably knew discussions that were happening behind the background. We've gone to circuits throughout history in F1 because a driver has been popular. Hell, there's a reason why we don't go to Germany anymore, unfortunately, because there's no popular German driver. Sebastian Vettel's gone, Michael Schumacher's gone. Yes, Nico Hülkenberg scored his first podium. Maybe if he continues to score more podiums, we'll make our way back to Germany, which I think we should do anyway because they have some great race circuits. But that is what has always happened in F1. It's the reason why we've gone to Zandvoort. And, well, Zandvoort are removing themselves from the calendar because Liberty Media just want too much money. But the Mexico Grand Prix clearly makes still a lot of money for Liberty Media, especially if Checo Perez is going to be in an F1 seat. And that brings us to our first factor for Sergio Perez signing for Cadillac. Money. Shock. Absolute horror. Money. Well, yes, F1, as we know, a very expensive sport to be a part of, and paying your way in the sport has always been an influential factor to get in a seat. And Sergio Perez, if you're unaware of this and you're new to the sport or new to Sergio Perez's connections, well, he has arguably one of the biggest benefactors in the sport. Outside of Lance Stroll, whose dad owns the actual team, Carlos Slim could own his own team if he wanted to. Yes, that individual, Carlos Slim, he is a Mexican billionaire, one of the richest men in North America, and he owns a considerable number of companies. And I think a lot of Red Bull sponsors are through the connections of Sergio Perez, i.e. Carlos Slim being his benefactor. And well, money here will be an influential factor as well, because hell, Cadillac have had to pay a $450 million dilution fee to the rest of the field to be added as the 11th team. I mean, that is a shed load of cash. And, well, Sergio Perez, supposedly, if the figures are still accurate, it might be even more now with him coming into Cadillac. Maybe Cadillac have wanted more. It was $30 million that he was bringing overall to Red Bull. So he was paying his own $10 million wage, I think, for the sponsors, and then bringing an additional 20 to 30 million even on top of that. There were conflicting reports there, but overall I think most people agreed he was bringing on average around $30 million in revenue. And well, that's just his own money and sponsorship back in, not including the merch money as well. He made a considerable amount of money for Red Bull with merch, outselling Max Verstappen as well. He is a very, very well supported driver across the world, and that is very important for a team like Cadillac, who are coming brand new into the sport. Yes, Cadillac is a well-known brand, but having a driver, and let's be honest, I think now with the way F1 is, and with Drive to Survive and so forth, there's more personal connections with the drivers now, and I think people support drivers more so than the teams. If a driver moved from one team to another, they're more likely to follow that driver regardless of even if they've hated that team beforehand. So Sergio Perez, very important for money, for sponsorship, for just gaining support from the fan base. That is a very important reason as to why he has been signed, or will be signed. Still not exactly confirmed yet, but I'm pretty sure that he is signed. And that brings us on to our second factor, which is experience. As Sergio Perez has a career of over a decade in F1. Now, the start of his career didn't go too well. It didn't really hit the ground running, although we thought it would do when he signed from Sauber to McLaren. But his time at McLaren, clashing with Jenson Button and just crashing too often, thought it could have been a very premature end. But then he found himself in the Force India and Racing Point, and well, this is really where you started to see the driving capabilities of Sergio Perez. This is why he was given an F1 opportunity outside of money, excluding money, which we always know is very influential, because Sergio Perez so often pulled off unbelievable drives from the midfield. He would make up 10 spots from overtakes, but also from strategy. I lost count the amount of times you would see Sergio Perez just perfectly manage his tyre. I mean, he was a tyre whisperer. This is why Red Bull brought him in. He scored podiums, he scored multiple point scoring finishes, top fives, etc. with Racing Point and Force India, because he would just do these ridiculous overcuts where he'd take the tyres so long at such a good pace, and he would just overcut all of the midfield teams, and that was through pure talent, through pure driving performance from Sergio Perez. And well, his experience in the midfield is going to be very, very important when it comes to Cadillac, because Cadillac are going to be joining. Who knows what's going to happen, to be honest with you. Never say never, because these new 2026 regs, who knows what's going to occur. But Sergio Perez could join with Cadillac, and most likely is going to be in the midfield. That's their aim. They don't want to be at the back of the grid. They want to join and fight in the midfield, no doubt. That'll be their aspirations. Long-term goals, of course, when they eventually bring in their own power unit and be a fully works team, will be, of course, to break into that top four and be fighting for championships, as is kind of every works team. It doesn't always work out that way, but for Cadillac, that will be their goal, and that's going to be very, very important for bringing an experienced driver like Perez in, who has that experience of driving with lots of other cars around them. Going at the front and being on your own all the time, or fighting with one or two cars, is very different when you've got 6-7 cars around you and you're looking at the wider picture to try and gain 5-6 positions via a strategy call. So that's going to be super influential. And of course, his experience with Red Bull. That is going to be so, so important. He was part of the most successful team in F1 history. Now, not in the long term, because Mercedes, of course, had more long-term dominance with those 8 constructors in a row. But with the record amount of wins, with how far ahead they were, the rest of the field, and with how well-oiled a machine Red Bull were. I mean, Mercedes still made poor pit stops. They still made some poor strategy calls, even when they were the team to beat in that hybrid era where they dominated. But Red Bull, that's why Max was so good, because there was just no fault. There was no fault in the strategy, in the pit crew, in the reliability side of things. Like, it was so, so good. And Sergio Perez, for at least the first few years of that regulation set, was solid. I think solid is what you can say. Yes, it wasn't on Max's level, but it was never going to be on Max's level. Not a prime Max Verstappen, as we have seen, now 4-time world champion. He was never going to be on that level, but he was never brought in to be on that level. He was brought in to be a dependable second driver to win the constructors. Now, Max could have won the constructors on his own, as we know, because of how dominant they were, but that's what he was brought in to do. And well, he supported Max in 2021. He supported it. He to an extent, supported him in 2022, and they eventually got their first 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship ever with Sergio Perez, although it was very close with him not getting that. But he still did enough, won 6 races with them in Max's prime, and while, of course, it tailed off at the end, and, well, now we're kind of maybe sitting here thinking, maybe we should cut Sergio Perez some slack. I mean, arguably, Sergio Perez's stock has gone up since he left Red Bull, because we've seen Lawson come in, we've seen Yuki Tsunoda now struggle with that second seat, and we've seen that while I do think Sergio Perez should have at least been getting that car into the Q3 most times, he still was able to fight for podiums. He was still able to get a result every now and then out of it, whereas now it seems like that whoever comes into that seat can't even get a result out of it, as Yuki is finding out, and as we saw from Lawson in the early stages, and we've seen how mentally draining that second seat is, no doubt, for Sergio as well, in especially that last year with all the off-track talks with contracts and so forth and media speculation. No doubt his mind would have been affected by that, and that would have affected and put more pressure on him in his performances out on track, which sometimes isn't always the best thing. Having that amount of pressure, you're second guessing yourself, triple, quadruple guessing yourself every single time, and that ends up being a detriment. No doubt it was, but all of that experience that he's had, whether it be positive or negative, is stuff that he can take to Cadillac, and he is going to be able to drive that team forward, give good feedback, whether it be on the strategy side, whether it be on the engineering side. Obviously he's not an engineer, but he'll be able to say, well, Red Bull did it this way, this is how they did it in their time, and why wouldn't you want to utilize that experience? And of course, feedback from the actual car itself out on track. Now, Cadillac have spoken supposedly that they are seeking an experienced driver and maybe a more younger driver, being a bit more risky on the second side, and I don't think that's too bad of approach to take, to be honest with you, as we've seen other teams do that, with the likes of Haas at the moment, with Stake F1 soon to become Audi. You've got the more experienced driver and then a rookie driver alongside. Doesn't necessarily mean the second driver has to be a rookie, but a younger driver, supposedly Mick Schumacher has been touted, also a driver that would bring a lot of money with him, as he also did with Haas when he was at Haas. So maybe that's the approach that Cadillac want to take. Don't think it's too bad, but also having a double experience pairing of maybe Bottas also would help the team drive them forward. You're putting in 2 proven race winners, multiple race winners, who have a wealth of knowledge and experience of top teams at the peak, and 2 teams that dominated most recently as well in Mercedes and Red Bull in your team. That, while it might not necessarily drive you to the top and break into that top 4, I think that would be a solid partnership, and that would end up driving that team maybe more forward than if you put a younger driver alongside. But I consider positives and negatives to both. Depends on what they truly want. But of course, Cadillac aren't bringing in just nobodies into the team. They are bringing in a wealth of experience of former F1 engineers and heads to drive that team forward. As I said, every team has aspirations when they join. But Sergio Perez, the money and the wealth of experience and the driving knowledge that he has and the feedback is going to be super important for moving Cadillac in the right direction. So I guess the last question really that needs to be asked to us is, do we want to see Sergio Perez back in the sport though? Me, I'm not so sure. However, the thing is, as I mentioned, the right decision for Cadillac is to bring in an experienced driver, at least one experienced driver. You'd be totally idiotic to bring in 2 young drivers into that seat. You want one experienced driver for the reasons I just mentioned. However, money always talks, doesn't it? money always talks, and well, that's something that, shall we say, Valtteri Bottas wouldn't necessarily have as much behind him. Bottas would probably bring money. Every F1 driver has to now these days, but nowhere near as much as what Sergio Perez will be able to bring, of course, with those benefactors that I mentioned. One in particular in Carlos Slim. However, I maybe think that Valtteri Bottas might be the better person to bring in. Mainly because he's still driving F1 cars, mainly because he hasn't had a year out like Sergio Perez, and also I think mentally he's probably in a better place than Sergio Perez. Of course, this is all just completely me guessing. I don't know Sergio Perez's mental state. I'm not in Sergio Perez's head. However, you look at the end of Sergio Perez's career, it didn't end very well by any means. He was very much down in the dumps with his performances, that is. And then he's also had a year out of F1, whereas Valtteri Bottas has made a concerted effort to stay in F1. He was down with Stake F1, which of course is now able to score points, but at least he has made sure to stay in F1, driving the Mercedes, driving the McLaren. He's done tests. He's been doing reserve. He's there as a reserve driver. He's ready to step back into F1. And I think Bottas, with his experience as well with Mercedes, and currently with Mercedes and with everything that's going on in F1, I think he would be a better choice. However, if they got the partnership of Bottas and Sergio Perez, I also don't think that's. I think that's quite a savvy driver partnership, to be honest with you, for a brand new team like Cadillac, because I think they're two very dependable drivers who'll be able to drive that team in the right direction. And then 2029 is where they're solidified. They're a good team. They're an attractive team, and they can get someone maybe who's a bit more lucrative, a bit more. Their stock is a bit higher and a bit younger. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Sergio Perez is the right choice? Are you excited about Sergio Perez's return? Are you ready for the redemption of Sergio Perez? And are you excited for finally having an 11th team on the grid? It's only a matter of time, really, until it's officially announced. We thought it was going to be announced back in Miami, but clearly maybe things weren't done and dusted there. I'm surprised if it will actually be announced in August, to be honest with you. I think the right time for them to announce it is probably when they head to America. They can put Circuit of the Americas, they can put on a whole show, Cadillac, you know, with guests and so forth, announcing Sergio Perez's signature, or even do it in the stadium at Mexico. That's where I think it will personally happen. But yeah, I think it'd be a bit of a, not a damp squib. I think they're missing a good opportunity to announce Sergio if they do it in the middle of the summer break. But maybe that's the approach they want.